Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, or hello if you are new here today. Before we start, I just want to say I do apologize if you can hear like banging and drilling. Again, like in a couple of my previous videos, they're like demolishing a house next door and behind us actually, and they're rebuilding, so there is a lot of noise. And plus I have all my family home at the moment because Victoria, Australia, unfortunately is still in a lockdown, so my whole family is working from home, including myself. Please just ignore any noise that you might hear in the background. In today's true crime video, we will be diving into a pretty well-known case from my understanding. I heard about this case many years ago, and it is still unsolved to this day, unfortunately, so I definitely wanted to share it with you guys. So in today's episode, we will be talking about the unsolved case of Joshua Maddux, or as some people like to refer to it as the boy in the chimney case. I just want to say as a disclaimer, as I always do, I am in no way a professional. I don't work in any areas of crime investigation or law. I just simply like to review and talk about different crime cases from all over the world, and all this information is from online sources that are available to you guys and the general public. No disrespect is ever intended towards anyone I may mention in this video or any of my other videos on my channel for that fact. So with that all being said, let's just dive into this case. So Joshua Maddux was born on March the 9th, 1990, making him 18 years old at the time of this case that we will be talking about shortly. Joshua lived with his family in Woodland Park, Teller County, which is in Colorado in the USA. Can I just say, what a lovely name for a town. It sounds so like naturey and just like fresh and vibrant. I love it. Now, Joshua's parents were divorced, so he actually lived with his father Mike, and he had two sisters, Ruth and Kate. Joshua also had an older brother, Zachary, but unfortunately the family lost him due to suicide in 2006. He was 18 at the time, so that made Joshua around 16 years old. It was said that Zachary was suffering with pretty severe depression at the time he committed suicide, and it was very hard on Joshua. He really held his older brother in high regard. He really looked up to him, so he took the death of his brother very hard. The family said despite this loss being very hard on Joshua, he was a very positive person, so although it was sad, he was dealing with it quite well as time went on. Joshua was, as I said, described to be a very positive young guy. He had a carefree attitude to life, and in his spare time he loved playing his guitar, writing music and listening to music, just a free spirit sort of guy. Joshua was also said to be really bright at school, super creative, and he was very much well liked by his classmates. So on May the 8th, 2008, Joshua was 18 years old at this time, and I'm fairly certain it was just a normal day at the Maddux family home, nothing out of the ordinary at all. Joshua told his older sister Kate that he was going to head out for a walk or a hike, and this was not unusual for him to go off by himself on these walks. He, as I said, was a bit of a free spirit. He loved being outdoors in nature, and I'm sure in Woodland Park, Colorado, there are plenty of places to walk with beautiful scenery, I'm imagining, so this was definitely not out of the ordinary for Joshua to go out. His sister Kate thought absolutely nothing of it, and Joshua set out from the family home out on his hike. So flashing forward to later in that same day, the evening actually rolls around, and Josh's father Mike realizes that his son's not home, so he asks the family, has anyone seen Josh? Kate explained to Mike that Josh had gone out for a walk earlier that day, but he hasn't obviously returned home yet, but it's a little bit worrying because he definitely should be home by now. Mike was a little worried, but didn't think too much of it. He knew that his son loved going out and walking in the national parks and hiking in the trails in the area of town, so he just sort of let it go for now and just assumed that Josh would return home any minute. So on the following morning of May the 9th, Mike woke up and realized his son Josh still had not returned home. He then started to call around to see if maybe Josh had spent the night at a friend's house, but unfortunately all the responses from Josh's friends were that they had not seen him either. Now, I definitely can't speak on behalf of the Maddux family, but I did read somewhere that there was a lot of trust between Mike and his son Josh. Josh was 18 after all, so he did a lot of the time just go to and from the family home. He would often go on outings all day, spend nights at friends' houses, and Mike always knew that his son would come home. Josh would always return home safe. He had proven that, over the years, and again, he's 18 now. So alarm bells weren't going off so much in Mike's head, I think because of this sort of trust. And I don't think Mike wanted to jump the gun and call the police if it was a false alarm. He just sort of remained calm and continued to wait for Josh to come home. But the 5th day rolled around where Josh had not returned home, so Mike phoned the police to report his son as missing. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, what? 5 days and Mike didn't call the police? I'm kind of wondering that too, because 5 days is quite a long time for your son not to come home. I don't think Josh had any history of running away. Again, I think this just comes down to the fact that Mike didn't want to call the police. He didn't want to overreact in case it turned out that Josh was actually just staying at a friend's house. And then it would have caused this whole scene when it didn't need to be a scene. But still, 5 days, that's quite a long time. I definitely would have been calling the police on like the 2nd day maybe. Anyway, it happened, so nothing can be changed now, so let's just move on. So May 13th, Mike calls up the police department to report his son Joshua Maddux as missing. So obviously news spread in the community that Joshua Maddux was missing and he was an 18-year-old boy, and it turns out that literally no one had seen him. No one had any information about him. He was not at anyone's house. They didn't think, just nothing. Searches began for Josh in the nearby walking tracks and areas and in the national parks. Upon his departure, I don't think Josh mentioned to Kate where he was going to be walking or hiking that day, so they just had to do a big search in the area in general just to see if they could pick up any clues, or maybe he was injured on a trail somewhere. Friends and family were searching alongside the authorities as well in the national parks, but just absolutely nothing was coming from this. Days and months went by with still no information as to where Josh's whereabouts was. There was no evidence to suggest any kind of foul play. There was just really no evidence at all. The family ultimately thought, well, maybe he just ran away to start a new life. The family thought he is 18 years old. Maybe he just took off to start a new life, to pursue his music and make it into a career because that's what he loved to do. I couldn't find this in any readings I did, but I just thought about it while I was researching the case, that maybe the family thought it was a reasonable explanation that Josh did run away because maybe he took like important things on his hike. I'm assuming if he was gonna go out for a hike for a while, maybe he took a backpack. Perhaps he took a wallet with some ID in it, with some cash in it, or money or credit card. So then maybe it was reasonable to think that he could have run away because he had his important items. However, if they searched his room at home and found that his wallet or ID or even just none of his clothes were missing, then is it really a reasonable explanation to think that he ran away? You need something with you to run away. Did he take an extra change of clothes? Was his wallet missing? Did he have a phone? I couldn't find that anywhere online, so I'm interested to know whether they found things missing in his bedroom or not. Just some food for thought. Months with no sign of Josh Maddux turned into years, and still nothing was uncovered about this boy's disappearance. It was just a complete mystery. I'm sure this must have been absolutely shocking for the family, and I feel so sorry for them because it's just such a lengthy period of no closure. I'm sure it was such an anxious time, constant fear for your loved one. Josh's sister Kate ended up writing a Facebook post in regards to her brother's disappearance saying, quote, "Since Josh was 18, it has been reasonable to assume he may have decided to leave town to start a new life. As one of his two older sisters, I have always chosen to believe this was the case. I have expected Josh to return home to my father's house at any time with a wife and small children so they can meet their grandparents and two aunts. Josh has always been known for his musical and literary talents, so maybe we could find him playing music with a band on tour or catch him writing successful novels under a pen name so that he could keep his preferred lifestyle of solitude in the woods." 7 whole years go by and the case eventually went cold in that 7-year period, up until a very grim discovery was made only about 2 blocks from the Maddux's family home. In August of 2015, a builder by the name of Chuck Murphy, who was 80 years old at the time, was demolishing an old wooden cabin that he owned on Meadowlark Lane in Woodland Park. The area was in the woods, surrounded by massive pine trees, and Chuck Murphy had originally purchased the cabin in the 1950s, but before this date, it was owned by a Swedish guy who ran the cabin as like a dining or drinking establishment. I guess we just call that like a pub here in Australia. However, this Swedish fellow was actually running illegal gambling and prostitution inside this cabin establishment. So he was actually arrested by the FBI and taken away. So then Chuck Murphy bought the cabin, and then his brother actually lived in it up until 2005. And then upon his departure from the cabin, it was just basically used as storage. Chuck still owned the cabin, but he rarely visited it, and no one lived in it for a decade after this. As I said, it was just used as storage. So it was very, very run down by this time, and it was kind of basically abandoned. So in August of 2015, Chuck decided that he was going to demolish the cabin because no one was using it anymore, and they were actually trying to make way for property development in the area. Chuck did mention when he got there to do the demolition work with the team, he noticed that there was a lot of animal damage to the cabin, and there was actually a foul odor in the air around the cabin. So the crew were demolishing the cabin, and as they were dismantling the chimney, they made a horrific discovery. Inside the chimney was the decomposing skeleton / body of a man cramped in the fetal position with his legs above his head. Chuck was obviously horrified, and so were all the workers, so they called the police immediately. Authorities then quickly arrived to the scene along with a coroner who was able to use dental records to identify the mystery man in the chimney. They then finally identified the body as that of missing boy Joshua Maddux. So everyone was absolutely stunned with this discovery, especially the Maddux family, of course, because they had been convincing themselves for the past 7 years that their family member had just gone and made a new life for himself, but in reality, he's turned up actually not even that far away from their home. I don't think anyone actually directly searched the cabin all those years ago when they were doing the searches for Joshua Maddux. I couldn't find any direct information online whether they actually searched inside or not. I did see a report saying that there seemed to be no signs of life around the cabin. So I'm assuming they were sort of searching in the area of the cabin, maybe had a quick peek inside, but they said that there was no reason for them to check the chimney. If it were me and I was searching for a missing person and we stumbled across an abandoned cabin, I would think to look in the cabin, look in all the crevices, look in the chimney. Like, why not? You're searching for a missing person. That was the only kind of thing I read about the cabin and the search. So I don't actually know if they went inside or if they were even around the cabin. I just know a report said there didn't seem to be any signs of life. So I'm assuming they were there. Then, because of all the demolition that was going on around the cabin before they found Joshua Maddux in the chimney, there was a lot of potential evidence that was ruined. Obviously, the number one question was, how did Joshua Maddux even get into the chimney in the first place? Did he fall in the chimney, or did somebody put him there? Accident or foul play? From what I've read online, I think Josh's family assume it was an accident. They think that Josh went out for a hike, like he said, and then he stumbled across this abandoned type cabin. He was exploring it because it's a cabin in the woods, it's cool. Maybe he was climbing on it, and then unfortunately it was a freak accident. Maybe something slipped underneath him and he fell into the chimney and he got stuck and then proceeded to die because he couldn't get out. Just a horrible accident. Police also noted that there was no other homes in the vicinity of the area because this cabin was on a massive piece of land in the woods. So even if Josh had fallen in as an accident and he was crying out for help, no one would have heard him. So on the 28th of September 2015, Joshua Maddux's death was ruled as an accident by the coroner. However, he did mention that it was very strange circumstances. He mentioned that there was no drugs found in Joshua's system, there wasn't even any broken bones, there was no signs of trauma, no knife like marks, no bullet holes, nothing like that. He also mentioned that Josh's death was not instant, but he was not alive in the cabin for a long period of time. He has been there for the 7 years that he was missing. He mentioned that he probably didn't starve to death because that takes a numerous amount of weeks. So dehydration or hypothermia is probably the most likely thing that happened, but they can't determine which one happened first or which one of it was. So, okay, freak accident, natural causes of death, case closed, right? No, case opened. When the coroner's report came out, there was a lot of people that were really questioning it, especially the cabin owner, Chuck Murphy, because he noted that there was so many circumstances or strange circumstances that had not been accounted for. Chuck said that he definitely installed a wire grate that was sort of at the top or just under the top of the chimney. So then it meant that, you know, birds can't fly down into it. It basically blocks off the chimney but still allows the smoke to come through. So he doesn't understand how Josh could have gotten into the chimney from the top with that wire grate there. He could not fall through that chimney without removing the grate. The coroner said, well, we didn't see a metal grate in any of the crime scene photos, so maybe it was removed or it rotted away so many years ago. Chuck said, no, my demolition team definitely collected all the wire and metal in the cabin and within the cabin to collect it for scrap. Obviously, at the time, they didn't realize the significance of this grate, and I don't think anyone can 100% confirm whether it was still attached inside the chimney or not. If the grate was still connected in the chimney and then Josh was underneath it, then how on earth would Josh be on the roof, fall down the chimney, and then suddenly put a grate over at the top of the chimney again, unless somebody else put the grate on top again. Another very strange thing found inside the cabin was a wooden breakfast bar had been basically torn off the wall. Not only was it torn from the wall, but it was actually pushed up now against the chimney on the inside of the cabin, so the fireplace, which blocked the chimney. How did that even happen, and why is someone trying to block the chimney? Are they trying to cover up something in the chimney? Example, did someone put Josh in the chimney and then push the breakfast bar up against it so no one would see it if they were snooping around the cabin? I don't think breakfast bars can just tear themselves off the wall and then magically put themselves somewhere else. Doesn't really make any sense. Josh's body was also found in the fetal position, as I said earlier, but it was actually noted that Josh's legs were completely disjoined from his torso. And they say that for him to get himself in such a position, he would have had to go down the chimney head first. Why on earth would you launch yourself down a chimney head first at your own will from the roof? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Unless somebody puts you in head first. I'm trying to play a scenario in my head. I'm just thinking about, you know, if you're standing on a roof and even if you trip, how do you trip head first down a chimney? I don't think it was a massive chimney either. Obviously, he was in the fetal position in the chimney, so it wasn't very wide, so it's very unlikely that you would accidentally fall head first down a chimney. Josh's body was also only found to be wearing a thermal shirt, so he wasn't wearing any other clothes. What is also very weird is that Josh's clothes were found to be folded neatly inside the cabin next to the fireplace/chimney. What? So what? He went into the cabin, stripped off all his clothes, folded them neatly, except for his shirt. Then he went outside, climbed on the roof, and then launched himself down a chimney head first, half naked. I feel like the only reason anyone would do that ever is if they were on drugs or hallucinating. But the coroner said there was no drugs found in his system, so how does this make any sense? Or he stripped off inside the cabin and then entered into the chimney from the inside, not from the top. Again, first, why would you even do that? Like, why would you even climb into a fireplace? But again, the coroner said that he must have gone down head first to get himself into that strange position. They decided to revise the report because of all this backlash about all this strange information that was coming from the case. Then they came up with 3 options. It was either accident, murder, or undetermined cause. And they chose accident again. But they did say that he definitely came down the chimney, and that was their conclusion. Chuck Murphy, the cabin owner, strongly believes that it was no accident. He does not believe for a second that that boy would have stripped down from his clothes and gotten himself into the chimney, especially because he is so convinced that he definitely had that wiring there, so he couldn't have come down the chimney. He just thinks it's way too suspicious and that the authorities just brushed it off as an accident. So apparently, after all this stuff had been coming out about the Joshua Maddux case, there were a handful of phone calls actually made to the coroner's office and the police office, with someone telling them that they had a hunch about who a potential suspect could be if this was a murder case. Apparently, this source that had the information said that they heard this potential suspect say, "I put Josh in a hole." The source that called the coroner's office and the police office was actually ignored multiple times. Their phone calls weren't returned, even though they were pressuring the police saying, "I have more information. You should definitely look into this guy that I think might have potentially killed Joshua Maddux," but they just completely went ignored. So because they were ignored by authorities, they decided to write their story about what they might potentially know on Reddit. Basically, just to sum up the Reddit post, this person wrote about how they went to school with this guy called Andy, and he became friends with Josh Maddux. After Andy and Josh started hanging out, Josh suddenly went missing. This Andy guy was Andrew Newman and was confirmed to have gone to the same high school as Joshua Maddux, so it is potentially credible that they knew each other or could have even potentially been mates. Apparently, the two had been talking about taking a trip together to New Mexico, but Josh didn't end up going to New Mexico, as we know, but Andy did. While in New Mexico, Andy ended up befriending a caretaker at a restaurant or a bar of some sort, and this caretaker actually looked after a disabled man. Andy asked if he could stay at the caretaker's house for the night because maybe he had nowhere to go. The caretaker said yes, so Andy went home with him and the disabled gentleman. When they got home, the caretaker took a shower, and when he returned to the living room, he found that his disabled friend had been stabbed to death in the apartment. Andrew Newman was nowhere to be seen, so it seemed as though he had stabbed this disabled gentleman. So then in the same year, but in Texas this time, Andy was taken to the police station because he was inside a person's home and acting weird with their children. I think he just basically trespassed onto their property. Upon arriving to the police station, his fingerprints were taken, and it ended up being a match to the murder in New Mexico where the disabled man had been stabbed to death. So they had this Andy guy's fingerprints linked to that crime scene. Then Andy claimed to have killed a woman in Taos, and he said that he stuffed her body in a barrel. So this body in the barrel case was true. They had found a woman in a barrel, but even though Andy confessed, the police in New Mexico already had a suspect for this body in the barrel case, so they dropped it against Andy, even though he literally said that he did it and they found a woman in a barrel. The case against the disabled gentleman's death was also dropped against Andy because the caretaker had died some years ago, so now it was going to be hard to track down any evidence, or he was dead, so he couldn't give a statement. Even though Andy's fingerprints were literally linked to that crime scene, they just thought, oh nah. And the body in the barrel case, he admitted to it, but they thought, oh no, we've already got a suspect. Nah. Like, did they put an innocent man in jail? So I'm sorry if that little section was a bit confusing. Again, it's just, this is what the source knew about Andy, and this source thinks that he killed Josh Maddux, so he's asking the police, you need to look into this guy. The source also said they're pretty certain that the last person to be with Josh was this Andrew Newman guy. And it just seems very suspicious to them that as soon as Joshua Maddux goes missing, this Andy guy allegedly kills 2 people. Although the cases, those murder cases, I'm pretty sure both of them were dropped against the Andy guy, he is confirmed to be a serial offender because he's had multiple charges and arrests and been to prison and all that kind of stuff. So he is a dangerous man. For example, in 2012, he assaulted a police officer. In 2015, he trespassed onto a property. In 2018, he trespassed again and was done for theft or burglary. And in that same year, he was done for fleeing as a fugitive and again for assaulting 3 police officers. Then he assaulted another police officer in prison in 2019. So he's got a proven record, but nothing has been proven to link Andrew Newman with Joshua Maddux so far. And obviously, this source wrote this on Reddit. It's Reddit. No one has any idea if it's actually a credible source. We don't know for sure if this source 100% saw Andy and Josh together, but all the stuff about this Andy guy and his criminal record seems to be true. Plus, there's no proof that this Josh and Andy guy were actually friends in high school. I believe it's true that Andy went to the same high school, but that doesn't mean they're friends. Plus, can I just ask, if this source says that they 100% know that Andy was the last person to be with Josh Maddux, then were they there too? Like, how do you know that he was the last person to be with Josh Maddux before he disappeared? Were you also there with Josh Maddux before he disappeared? It just seems a little strange. Either someone told you that, so how is that 100% credible? Or you saw them, which means you were there. I'm not pointing fingers or anything, but it's just, I don't know, it just seems a little bit strange with this whole Reddit thing. Again, the source pestered the police to look into Andrew Newman in regards to the death of Joshua Maddux, but nothing came from that. I don't think they followed it up or looked into it much. I don't know if they are now or not, but they have not connected Andrew directly to Josh Maddux. I do know a lot of people do believe online that Josh was murdered by this Andrew Newman guy. Some people also believe that there was a sexual element to this crime because Josh was only found with a thermal shirt on. Some people theorize that Joshua Maddux went to the cabin willingly to meet up with someone for sexual activities, and that is why their clothes are found neatly folded inside the cabin, because he purposely put them there. Other people think that maybe it wasn't consensual and the person that Josh may have met up with ended up killing him. Other people theorize that Josh did go for a walk that day and he stumbled upon the abandoned cabin and met with foul play there. Somebody killed him inside the cabin and stuffed his body into the chimney from the inside. But it doesn't really correlate well with the fact of how his body was found. It's just a bit hard for people to believe that somebody could push a body into a chimney the way that Josh Maddux's body was found. It's also hard to believe that somebody killed Josh Maddux inside the cabin and then dragged his whole body up onto the roof and then put him down the chimney and let him fall into that position. That's why some people believe he must have been pushed into the chimney while he was alive. But again, that means somebody must have been standing up on the chimney with him or restrained him to then get him into the chimney. As we talked about before, I don't think it was a very big chimney and it's not a very wide chimney. So he must have been restrained a lot to be put in there and fallen from the top. I just find it hard to believe that Josh would voluntarily get in the chimney himself, either from the top or the bottom. The breakfast nook, that sort of points to foul play. The only reason I could think of why someone would rip out a breakfast nook and push it up against a chimney is if they're trying to hide something or block something out. What other reason would there be for a piece of furniture to be blocking a chimney where a dead body is found in? It just seems a little bit too suspicious. I also don't believe that Josh Maddux took his clothes off while he was stuck in the chimney because, one, why would you do that anyway if he was stuck? Two, I don't think he could have even gotten his clothes off in the position that he was in. And three, his clothes were found outside the fireplace, outside the chimney, folded. You can't just throw clothes out of the chimney and then they magically appear folded. Did Josh meet this Andy guy that the Reddit post was talking about and he lured him in and killed him in the cabin and then proceeded to put him in the chimney to hide him and flee? Yes, this Andy guy is a known criminal. However, we are establishing a connection between Andy and Josh based off a Reddit user. How credible is this source? So to this day in 2021, the Joshua Maddux case, or the boy in the chimney case, is still unsolved. And I'm sure you know from watching this video, listening to this video, or listening to other videos about it, that this case often brings up a lot more questions than answers. I don't really get out of all three options of accident, murder, or undetermined, the coroner or the team picked accident. Like, why didn't they just pick undetermined? There's just so many questions still unanswered, and they can't even prove it was an accident, right? Let me know what your theories are on this case down below, but please be respectful. Everyone has a right to believe in their own theory, and definitely because this case is not solved yet, nothing can be 100% proven. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more true crime content from me, and otherwise, I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!